In this video, you're going to learn how to build a CRM app in Bubble completely without code. Follow along as I walk you through how to set up the database structure, design the front-end pages, and hook up all the workflows so that you have a functional and scalable CRM that you can customize to fit your specific needs. Here are the features we're going to be tackling today, and keep in mind that this is a baseline set of features. Your application will likely have additional functionality, additional flows, additional data sets. Use this as a starting point, and you can customize from there. Here's our sample application. We're going to be moving between 3 different pages: contacts, pipeline, and email. We're currently looking at the contacts page, so I have a table of my individual contacts. I can edit kind of the top level details in line here from this view, but I can also open up an expanded view with this icon here. This will give me a bigger window. I see all that same information plus a few more details, such as a second phone number and notes. So for example, here I want to add a new note for Mountain Rentals. That's the name of my contact. Click on this plus icon and that's been added to the list. So these notes are attached to this contact specifically. This is really helpful, especially if I'm working with a team. We're all on the same page about this contact's history overall. Okay, and then I can always go back to my overall contact list. Now under pipeline, this is going to be a drag and drop interface where I can manage all of the deals created for each of my contacts. So for example, I have Seaside Tours here, which is under the demo scheduled stage of the pipeline. And let's say that I pick it up and drag it over to the demo complete. Once I do that, it's gone from this column and it's added to this column. So I can move these all around however I need. And I have some summaries here, some aggregations happening, adding up the number of deals in this stage and also the total value for that particular deal. If I go to click and open up the deal, I can modify these details. Very simple here, just as an example, but obviously you can do whatever you want. It just depends on the data that you want to organize in your overall CRM and sales process. Okay, so I can always create a new deal by clicking on this button here. So let's say I want to create a new deal for CNCA and the value is going to be 7,500 and we're going to start them at the beginning of the sales flow under the demo scheduled stage. I'll click on create deal and you see that new card just popped up there because it's meeting a search. And we'll go over all of this logic behind the scenes, but the biggest kind of feature here is that we have this drag and drop behavior to make it really easy to move your deals across the pipeline. Now moving over into the email section here of our application, we actually have an integration with Postmark, which is an email service provider. So we're communicating with Postmark via API to send custom emails from the application directly. We're not having to log into Postmark or anything to do that. It's all via API, and we can take advantage of tracking information, delivery statuses that Postmark gives us, so we can display that back to the user here in this interface, just like you see in this table. Okay, so these are 2 emails that have been sent through that API. I can also filter, let's say, by my contact. So if I do just for CNCA, there's just the 1 email there. So when I click on this button here where it says new email, I have an area to compose a new message. So I'll select my contact, we'll do CNCA again. It's going to show the email address that it'll ultimately be sent to. We'll put in a subject line, thank you for your time, and we'll put in a body, let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so I'm going to send a new email now, and this is going to communicate with Postmark. To, as we can see here, send to that contact. I'm capturing a lot of the details in the database of the app so that I can refer to them easily, but this status is also coming back from Postmark specifically, so I know it was delivered. So if the user's inbox was full or if it bounced, something like that, we would be able to see other information. Postmark can also track opens, any links being clicked. You can show a lot of information here to have everything in one place within your custom application. Now that you have an overview of our example features, let's jump into the editor so that I can walk you through how this was all put together. We're going to start with the database structure. All right, so here is the data structure for the CRM app. Let's start with the user data type. This is the built-in data type that comes with every single Bubble application. It is going to describe the user that is logging into the system. So the person who's actually using the app, let's say it's a sales rep or a project manager coming in and creating emails, managing the pipeline, things like that. We don't have very many details here because the features that we're demonstrating don't involve the user's own record data too much, but we are logged in as a user in order to take advantage of certain privacy rules, to make sure that the access is protected. Okay, so at the moment I just have a first name, last name, and a timestamp for when they last logged in, but we're not really working with any features today involving users managing their own records. all of our other data types we will be working with more closely. So the heart of this whole thing here is our contact. This is a separate custom data type, which I created by typing in, the new type name here, contact, and it created this new table essentially in my applications database. Within that data type, I've added my custom fields to describe the contact. So any information I want to save for a contact, I need to make sure that there's a field set up for it. So note that this isn't specific to, one contact. This is simply the structure of a contact record in my database. So I have a text field to store their email address, another text field to store their first name, and so on. There is a unique field here, which you can see is a list of notes, and this is actually a relationship field, which relates the contact to one or more note records. And note is actually its own data type. Let's actually jump over to this one right here now. So the note is going to have the actual note content, plain text. Then it's going to have a relationship back to its contact, right? The one-to-one relationship for who this note is for. And then we also have a timestamp for when the note was created. Now, this is optional. Every data type is going to have a built-in creation date and time, as well as a last modified date and time. But I thought it would be helpful to know that, you can also add additional timestamps for things if they aren't necessarily going to match the built-in creation and last modified date. All right, so that's our note here. So the contact can have a relationship to one or more note records as a whole. This is not a list of just the text itself. It's actually a relationship to those entire note records with the timestamp and all. Moving over to the deal, these are the records that are being displayed within our pipeline design. Okay, so every deal is going to have a relationship to a contact. We also have a numerical value, right, because this is for kind of a sales flow. And then we also have a status, which is using what's called an option set. So the status can be one of these 5 choices: demo scheduled, complete, contract sent, won and lost. And if you recall, this is actually, these are the stages of my pipeline. And I could have called it stage instead of status, but we're talking about the same thing here. So the option set is something that you also put together yourself. You go over to this other sub tab here. And here you can see, let me go over to deal stage. This is my option set called deal stage, and these are all of the different options for this entire set. So it's up to me to put together this pre-configured list of choices. And I'm actually referencing this in a few different ways within my design to make things much more efficient, to make sure everything is consistent. I always, they're always spelled the same way, things like that. I've also attached an attribute to each of these options called color. This is a custom attribute. So for example, demo scheduled is this color code here, whereas demo complete is another color code. And where I'm using those colors is here in this drag and drop design. So these colors are actually populating the design dynamically. If I have other areas in the application where I wanted to color code my stages, it's a lot more efficient for me to reference the kind of pre-configured color here as opposed to setting up that color every single time, for every individual element in my design. It's just it's going to create more work if you do it that way, and it can lead to more error. So we're definitely taking advantage of that option set here, which allows us to link a deal with one of the choices from that set, right? So Bubble's kind of baked in my custom choices that I created into this part of the editor here. And we'll actually see that in other places as well. Right, and then finally we have the email message. So this is our other data type where we're going to store the content of the email. Because we do have an integration with Postmark, we want to save an ID that Postmark has generated for the message. This way we can track it, check delivery status, things like that. We also want to relate the email message to the contact so that we know who received the message. And again, we don't necessarily need all the contact details all over again here, like their name, email, things like that. As long as we have a link to the contact record, we'll be able to get access to all of the contact info. Then I also have another date field to record when it was sent. You may want to have kind of statuses around your email messages, such as a draft status, maybe a status to review if you have a bigger team, bigger process where things need to be reviewed before they get sent out, things like that. So having different timestamps for when the email moves across different stages can really help with tracking. And then we also capture the subject line. All right. So that's the structure of all of our different tables of data that are really powering the app. This is the information that we're manipulating in the design to see on the front end, but we do have to organize it, in a way here behind the scenes. And if we go over to the app data sub-tab, I can see here are my records that I've created for email messages. Here are my contacts, right? I can see all that same information in a much more plain view, within a sort of traditional spreadsheet style. But this is going to be helpful for me to confirm things, troubleshoot. The real magic is really happening on the front end where the user is able to interact with all of the designs. Hey, real quick, if you're finding this helpful, take a look at our free extended workshop over at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop, where we'll guide you through our 4-phase approach to go from idea to app. So if you're looking for a complete start to finish guide, you're going to really enjoy this workshop. We've got a lot of great stuff in there for you. So we've got the link on the screen right now, as well as in the description below. Now I'm going to walk you through the design aspect of all of these example features so you can see the visual components that came together and make this front end experience more interactive. So jumping into the design canvas now, the first thing I want to point out is that this app has been built across 3 separate pages: contacts, pipeline, and email. This multi-page structure makes things a lot easier to manage. You don't have a ton of visual elements all in one place. You can, of course, build this out in a single page structure, but it allows us to work with more unique layouts per page a little bit more easily. I also want to point out that we have a reusable element that we're using here called the header. I'm going to open this up now. So this is where the menu lives for all of our navigation. And the benefit of putting this in a reusable element is that I only need to design these buttons here once and hook up all the workflows for the navigation in one place, and then I'll be able to add instances of this reusable element to each of my 3 pages. And any change I make is going to automatically reflect across all those pages. So I'm saving myself a lot of time and effort. I don't have to duplicate my work. So for the header here, I have my 3 buttons to take the user to each of the 3 pages. And the only design thing I want to call out really is they have conditions so that they can change their styling just a little bit so that the user has a visual indicator on what page they're on within the app. It just helps them stay oriented. So for example, here for contacts, we have a condition that says when the current page name is literally the word contacts, right? I've just typed that in. That matches the name of my page up here. Then I'm going to change some of the styling properties. So I'm going to toggle this condition on so you can see a little preview of what it would look like, right? There's a bit of a border. There's got a white background now, so it stands out a little bit more compared to the other 2. So the other 2 buttons have the exact same condition with the exception of the value that they're responding to. So the pipeline button will only kick these in when the value is pipeline, and then for email, when the value, or in other words, the page name is email. Okay, so that's what we have design-wise here for the header. Now back to the contacts page, we have 2 different views that the user can be looking at. They could be looking at the table of overall contacts as we see here, and this is going to be our default view. They land on this as soon as they load the page. Or they can be looking at the expanded view of an individual contact where they can also edit more details for them. So the first container that I have in the design here is this primary group that I've called group main. This is always going to be visible. This is sort of setting the foundation for all other visual elements that will live inside of it. It will also help me control sort of the separation between background and foreground on the page. I can control the margins, the spacing with the page edges a little bit more that way, right? So that's my first container. I usually have a group like that on any page I design, no matter what type of application I'm working in. Creates a lot of great consistency there. And inside of this group, you can see obviously I have a title, and I also have a button that says new contact. We'll go over the workflows part of this a little later in this video, but this way the user has a clear action item to get started on this page or add a new contact to the list. Down below, I have a table element to create a spreadsheet-like design in viewing my list of contacts. Very clean, very organized, right? Really easy to read through. And within this table, I have all of these inputs for helpful inline editing, just quick edits if the user needs. That way they don't necessarily have to open up that full expanded view of an individual contact. So the setup for this table is going to be the type of content is contact, that's my data type, and the source is going to be a search of my contacts. Now you can implement a filtering system here. So if you have hundreds or thousands of contacts and you need a way to find a contact very easily, you can have inputs above the table to narrow down your search by contact status or maybe the date they were added, things like that. And that would mean mapping those inputs to these search constraints right here so that it affects the database search. At the moment, I have an open search, so it's just going to pull in everybody I have in my database, but be very mindful of this, right? If you're going to have users with certain permissions make sure that you're adding in the right constraints so that they only see what they're allowed to see. And so that data source is going to power the table. It will generate as many rows as I have contacts from that search result. So we're really only designing this first row here. You see that little infinity icon there. That means that it's going to be a repeating row. Every row represents a different contact. So all I need to do is set up the dynamic structure of an individual row, and Bubble will repeat that logic, those instructions, but with each individual contact separately. Okay, so in this first column here, I have an input to map to the contact's organization name. Here we have the first name, last name, email, and phone. You can see how some of the formats change for those inputs depending on what type of value I'm working with. Now you may also notice that I'm actually enabling auto binding here as well. So auto binding will automatically save any changes the user makes to these inputs without having to go through a workflow. It's a really nice little shortcut. The only thing you need to be mindful of is that you do have to have privacy rules set up for this. Privacy rules are a great thing. They help you create, global protections on your data throughout your entire application. If you head over to the data tab under privacy, here we can see under contact, I do have privacy rules applied. Now I've got a very simple rule. You do want to make sure that you have rules that make sense for your application and the kind of access rights you want to create. Right now I have when the current user is logged in, then they're going to be allowed to auto bind on these fields. Again, meaning that a user can make a change to an input, it will automatically save those changes to the record in question. And because I have this rule here, now anyone else who falls outside of that rule, okay, this is the default permission, does not have access to be able to auto bind or even find contacts in searches or view any of their fields, right? You can get very granular with this. Your expressions can reference the current user. It can reference the contact itself. So I could say, and this contact's, organization is XYZ or was created after a certain date or maybe has a certain relationship to the current user. You can keep building on that expression. Back in the design of the contacts page, I'm going to hide this table and open up my other group, which is hidden right now. This is conditionally visible to see the expanded view of a contact. So most of this is really just a series of inputs for the user to further edit these details. We have more space here so we can add many more details compared to the table. And you'll notice that these inputs have initial content set to them. I'm not enabling auto binding here. This is a choice. I don't have to do it this way. I could have done auto binding, but because this is a group where there's going to be much more information, I want to give the user an opportunity to sort of draft their changes before they really commit to them, because there could be many. And so we're going to auto-populate these inputs with whatever is currently saved to the contact record, right? You can see here parent groups, contacts, organization name. And once they're ready to commit those changes to the database, they can save them through a workflow. And that save button is actually this button in the upper right corner. This button is serving dual purpose. By default, it'll say new contact, but if we go over to the conditions, you'll see here, when the group edit contact is visible, right, that's this group we're looking at right now, then we're going to change the way that button looks. It's going to say save changes, it will have a check icon, and it will turn green. I'm going to actually toggle this on so you can see what that looks like. Now this was also a choice. I could have had two separate buttons if I wanted, each with conditions to show and hide based on what we're looking at. But I wanted to consolidate, not have as many visual elements, use a little bit more of a dynamic logic around this. And so this button will serve two purposes, both to create a new contact and to save changes when we're looking at editing. Again, we'll go into the workflows in just a moment to see how that all comes together. But visually, that's how we're changing that appearance there. Okay, now over to the right, we have our notes system. So this is just a multi-line input so that they can have more room to write a lot more content. We have a button to trigger workflow to create the new note in the system. And then down below, we have a repeating group. Repeating group is similar to a table in that it also works with a dynamic list, but a repeating group gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of how you want to present that list, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be in a table format. You have a lot of freedom to change the widths and heights for a dynamic list in general. So this is going to display each note that we've added to the system specifically for this contact. So notice the data source here, right? It's, again, very similar setup to the table. Type of content is note. Data source is the parent group's contacts notes. This is that list field that is attached to the contact record. If we go back to the data structure for contact, This is our reference here to power that repeating group. The benefit of a structure like this is that we're not actually asking Bubble to do another database search, which could be heavier depending on the amount of data you have in the database. So this is a little bit of a shortcut to make things more efficient. It's a more efficient pathway to that specific list of notes. For Bubble to return those results. We also have an icon here in order to remove the note if the user decides to get rid of it. You can see within our repeating group here we have a text element to display the timestamp as well as the actual note content itself. So again, similar to the table, the repeating group is such that you only need to design one cell and it will duplicate for you depending on your data source. All right, now on the pipeline page, we've got a really fun element to work with here, which is the Draggable Elements plugin. I'm actually going to go over to the plugins screen here, and this is the plugin that we're working with. It is a Bubble published plugin called Draggable Elements. It's a free plugin, and it comes with a few different components. We have 2 visual elements that you would need to add to your design. You have the actual container, the group, that you're able to drag around the screen and drop onto a drop area, which is a separate type of container. And that action of dropping a draggable group can trigger a workflow. So the workflow event will automatically detect, you can see here, when a drop area has a group dropped onto it. This also technically has a separate workflow action where you can programmatically move a draggable group as opposed to the user picking it up themselves and moving it around. We won't be using that action here in this application. We will be working with all 3 of these other components, okay? So the elements are technically containers, but they're special containers with this drag and drop capability. So in our design, first we can see here's my group main, very similar to the contacts group. I've got my title and I've also got my button to trigger the creation of a new record so that it shows up in this, this table here. So what this element is here, this sort of primary table that we see, this is a repeating group, right? So this is a really good example of how repeating groups can be manipulated, away from that spreadsheet style, but still allow you to work with a dynamic list. So this repeating group has 5 columns and 1 single row, right? You can see our structure here. The data source for this repeating group is not all of the deals in my pipeline. You may think it is because that's actually what you're seeing, fill in all of the cards, and it looks like we have a repeating group that's a giant grid. But really the repeating group is just the stages. The repeating group is only setting up the 5 columns so that within each column we can further add more lists and other texts and buttons and things like that. So the repeating group type of content is the deal stage option set that I've created in my data area here, right? Deal stage, I've got those 5 options that I custom created here, okay? And then you can see that the data source says all deal stage. This is built into this dynamic window here because your option sets are sort of baked into the editor, which is really a nice benefit. So as long as the option set is created, we choose type of content for that option set, you will see this option here, all, and then whatever the name of your option set is. And so every dynamic column that the repeating group generates will reference a single deal stage, right, choice from my option set list. Now within the individual cell, this is the only place you need to design and modify anything. Here, let me open up the hierarchy so you can see this, okay? We have a drop area. That's the immediate container within the repeating group cell. So when you install that plugin, you're gonna find that you have the drop area element as well as the drag drop group. So the first element inside of the cell is our drop area. So this one has some special properties that you need to work with. For tolerance, what this means is how sensitive do you want it to be able to detect that some draggable group is being dragged over it? Does it just need to intersect with the drop area, or does the draggable group have to be fit completely inside of the boundary of the drop area? Rarely will you want to select the fit selection here. Intersect is going to be the most common and really the most forgiving and helpful for the user. They don't have to really get it exactly right where their mouse lands. So I do recommend intersect for most cases. And then your drop area is technically also serving as a data source. So it needs to keep that reference of the cell's deal stage that we're working with. So we're going to set the type of content to deal stage. That's our option set. And the source is going to be the current cell's deal stage. So if we're currently looking at, let's go over to our preview here and refresh the page so we can show you an example. Go to our pipeline page. Okay, so if we're in the cell where the stage is demo scheduled, the drop area is able to reference that cell's stage because we're going to need it for triggering workflows, for finding the right deals. That's going to be a helpful reference there. Okay, you can also see that in the condition of the drop area element, you can change visual properties whenever this drop area is dragged over. This is a special built-in state that comes with that plugin element. So when it's detected that something is being dragged over it, a draggable group that is, then we're going to change the color ever so slightly. So you can see here as I drag this group over, there's a very slight background color change. It's just another visual indicator for the user that it is being detected. Now inside of this column, inside of the drop area, I have a handful of other containers and actually another repeating group within it. So this first group here, still referencing the deal stage of the cell. And here is where I have my dynamic color, pulling from that option set so that we can see these different colors in the design like this. And in a consistent way, right? I could have other areas in my app where I need to see these same color coding designs. Rather than configuring the color for each individual element, I can just pull from the parent group's deal stages color. Right? This is that custom attribute that I had created in the option set here. As long as I fill in the actual color code for each of my choices, I'm set. Now I can reference that dynamically wherever I want to display it. And the text here is going to display the deal stages display. That's literally just talking about the label for each of the choices, right? That's the display property. Okay. Down below, I have another group here in a row structure, right? A row layout where I can display the number of deals within this stage as well as the total value of the stage, right? Of all of the deals in this stage. And actually, it'll make more sense for these aggregations here if we look at how we're finding all of the deals within the stage. Okay. So below, I have a repeating group. This is going to do a search for deals. Notice the type of content now is deal. And we're searching for deals. There's a match there in the format. And here I have a filter, right? I've got a constraint on my search. I only want to search for deals where the status, I really should have called this stage, that's the field name within the deal, but where the status equals the parent group's stage. It's filtering down my deals to only find, for example, demo scheduled or demo completed or won or lost. So this search will happen multiple times, once for each stage. So now this is going to narrow down our deals. Okay, so inside of the repeating group, now it's just a matter of designing the little card that we're going to drag around this screen. So inside of the repeating group, here is where we have our draggable group. Okay, this is the thing that the user is going to pick up. And you'll notice that in the design, we've put it together so that it looks like something you can pick up. It's separated from the columns. So, there's some drop shadow there. There's a little bit of roundness. The color, the background color is different from the, really the rest of the entire page. So those sort of visual things can help make it really clear for the user that they can sort of pick it up and it's sort of a standalone thing. So the draggable group also has its own sort of unique properties here. What we've enabled is we want to make it droppable because that needs to trigger a workflow. We have to make it droppable in order to detect the drop area receiving something and then kicking off a change in our database. And really the function behind the scenes is just changing the stage for that deal. Okay. After the group has been dropped, there's a couple of behaviors that you can choose from. You can move it back to where it came from, or you can hide it. Now, in reality, there's sort of a function that's going to take priority over this behavior, which is we're changing underlying data details, which will affect the data source of the repeating group no matter what. So, whether you do hide group or move back, you're going to get the same behavior. But you should test it out in your own designs to see, the actual experience. In some cases, you may see some jumping around of those elements until the data sources catch up with you. So we have it on hide group. It's a little bit cleaner, but again, you will get the same behavior with move back. Then we have our type of content and data source here. The type of content is deal. The current cells deal is the data source because we want to make sure that this group has a reference to the actual deal. We want to be able to display the name, the value of that individual deal, and ultimately also open up that pop-up where we can modify those details if we need. Okay. So inside this group, I am displaying the deals related contacts organization name. You see how these relationship fields allow us to sort of traverse multiple tables to get us the information we want. The deals related contacts organization name. Down below, I have the deal's value, and I'm formatting that as a currency so we can actually see it, like a dollar amount. And then I have a button here that's going to trigger workflow to open up our pop-up. All right. Now going over to the pop-up here, this is really just a form. We have labels and inputs, to make it really easy to understand. So whether we're creating or modifying a deal, we're actually using the exact same pop-up here. So we're using conditions based on whether we're creating a new deal from this button or if we've opened up an existing from the pipeline here. So this text, for example, by default, it'll say create a deal. However, if there's a data source, a deal that has been sent to the pop-up, then we're going to change the text so that it says update deal. Same thing for the button. It'll instead say save changes. We'll look at this again when we go through the workflows because modifying the data source of the pop-up is going to happen in a workflow. Our first element here to look for a contact to associate with a deal is actually a search box. This is not a regular input. The search box elements gives you that sort of autocomplete result as you start typing, and you can have it search through your own records, your own data entry. So in this case, we're searching through our contacts by the organization name, and that way it'll start to pop up and offer suggestions. This is really helpful if you have a big list in your database. The user may not necessarily know exactly the name, and so it can help sort of make suggestions there. Then we have a regular input set to currency so that they can type in a value. And here we have a drop down, which is going to offer all of our deal stage choices, again, from the option set, so that they can associate a stage with a deal. We may not necessarily always want to start a deal from the first stage, right? So we're giving the user a chance to customize that. Now, over on our email page, this is going to be closer to how we put together the contact screen. We have our primary container, as always, right? Here's our group main. And then we have two conditionally visible elements within it. We've got our table of email messages, where we see all of the emails just as an overview. Now, this is more of a reporting type of design here, right? There's no inputs or inline editing because the email has been sent. There's really nothing to edit from there. So it's really just seeing all of the details for reference. And then we also have a group to compose a new email. So they're only seeing one or the other. By default, we'll show the table. And when the user clicks on the new email, it'll hide the table and it'll show this group here. So, there's really nothing too fancy going on with this table right now. We've got all of these columns set up. They are fitting to the content so that they can expand as needed based on the content within. Some people have longer email addresses. You may have a longer subject line. So it will adapt. When you fit to content, it'll help with that adaptation there. The elements within each of these columns are all text elements, and they're referencing the rows, email messages, details, right? So similar to all of our other dynamic lists we've worked with, type of content needs to reference the appropriate data type. In this case, it's going to be email message. And then our data source is going to search for our email messages. That way, everything inside will reference that row's email message, right? That row's timestamp, that row's contact. Now, I do want to call out this particular data source is also filtering optionally on the contact selected up here in the upper right. So this is just an example of creating a search for yourself so that if you have, hundreds, thousands of emails and you're looking for something specific, you can start to filter those down with inputs that you give the user here. So I've got a search box, right? This is that autocomplete system where we can search for specific content, and that's going to allow me to pull up all of the email messages just for that contact. And that way I can see sort of that person or that organization's history of emails without having other ones get in my way. Notice that I have this checkbox selected here, ignore empty constraints. What that means is that if I don't want to filter by contact, I leave this empty, Bubble will ignore this filter as if it doesn't exist. And what happens when this constraint isn't here? Well, I just return every single email message, right? You see everything. So you can really have best of both worlds there, all right? So inside of our cells here, email sent date, here we have the contact. Now we've decided to display multiple pieces of information for the contact, so you can see multiple expressions here. The messages, contacts, first name, space, the messages, contacts, last name, and then within, typed in parentheses, we have the messages, contacts, organization name, right? So what we get, let's refresh the page here so we can see just as a reminder of what that looks like. is like this, right? Lisa Simpson, Seaside Tours. It's to give the user just a reference of, which organization this user may belong to. We have our email address, we have the subject line, and for status, this is our only expression that's going to work with our integration with Postmark. We'll go over this integration in just a moment. So the other group that we have here is the group to compose our email. I'm going to hide this table. Okay, so really basic, we have another search box to search through our contacts so we know who we're going to send the email to. And when there is a value in that search box, we have a conditional text that will display the actual email address. So as a reminder, this is the behavior here. If I search for CNCA, only then, once I've selected, then this email address shows up. So I actually know what the address is. And I'm not looking at just the organization name, for example. So the condition here is going to say when the search box value is not empty, then this text becomes visible. It's important to set the default visibility of that text to not visible on page load so that, as soon as you see the group, it's hidden. Then we have a regular input for the subject line, another multi-line input for the user to enter in a larger body, and then our send email button. So pretty basic form here for sending out these messages. Before we move into the workflows, I want to take you through our integration with Postmark. This is an API connection that we've made with the service using a tool called the API connector. This is technically a plugin that you'll install into your app. So if you go to the plugins section of your editor, head over to add plugins in the upper right corner. It is the first one listed. This is published by Bubble and it's a free plugin. Now you can create as many connections as you'd like. You can actually see that I have 3 connections to 3 different services, one of them being Postmark. We'll be taking a look at this, and if you want to add another one, you'll click on this button here. It'll get you started with the next connection. So what this essentially is it's a communication tool to integrate with third-party services, APIs. You do need to pull open the documentation for that service's APIs because there will be requirements so that you can structure your requests properly according to however they need things with those communications. So I'm going to open up Postmark here so we can see how this all came together. The API name is an internal name for yourself just to identify. Then your authentication, this is something that you need to learn from the documentation, understand what the requirements are. Bubble has a number of presets for the most common authentication methods. So we're using private key and header, and then we have a key name and an actual key value. Now this value is the thing that's unique to my Postmark account. So this is all going to be structured and organized behind the scenes in the appropriate format for you. The purpose of this tool here is that Bubble's making it easy for you to essentially just fill out a form, and then Bubble will handle all of the coded process of sending that request with the right formats over to Postmark and receiving the response. Okay. We also have some shared headers for any request that we want to make to Postmark. These are simply additional details, some metadata to help define, the structure of our request, how our data is going to be formatted, and how we want to receive that format. This is also information we can grab from the documentation. Now down below is where we can actually set up our calls. Okay, so I can click again, add another call. It gets me started with another one. A call is a request. Okay, so every individual type of connection you want to make to your service, you're going to create a separate call. Now in my case here, I have 2 calls. I have one to send an email, using Postmark as the service provider, and then I have another call to retrieve email status. So one is actually going to be set up for a workflow action, and the other is going to be set up as a data source. All right, so I'm going to open this up here. Here we have an internal name for that call, send email, and I want to use this as a workflow action, so I'm choosing that there. I'm going to leave this on the default data type of JSON, and this is where we really need to look at the documentation to understand how we want to send in all of the information we want around our email. So if I go over to the reference here, I'm going to go to the email resource, right? You can see lots of different things you can do with their API. All I want to do is send a single email. Very simple, very straightforward. You can see here that there are some required headers and some required pieces of information within the body, as well as a handful of optional things if you want to further customize. So you want to spend some time with the documentation in order to understand what you can do with it. There are likely going to be a lot of required formatting for things. A simple value that's not formatted correctly can produce an error So you do want to make sure that you're doing everything exactly right. And often these references will have examples so that you can see what they should look like. Okay. You do need to run the call successfully at least once from the API connector before you can use it in your application's design. So when I initialize the call here, it will give me a response. I'm going to go ahead and click on this button here, right? So Bubble's going to show me the response, and Postmark sent back the following. We have no error code, everything was okay. We have our new message ID that represents that email. This is generated by Postmark. We have a timestamp, and then it also is sending back to me the recipient of that particular email address. Okay, so you can tell Bubble will do a pretty good job of auto detecting the formats of all of those values. But if it gets something wrong, for example, this submitted at, this is actually a date. I don't really want it to be recognized as a text. I can change this to a date here so that when I'm using the response in my design, in my workflows, I can actually work with it with the proper format. So I'll save from there, and now we're initialized. Now I can use this as an action in my workflows. We're going to see that here we have a new action that we can look at. So if we go to plugins, okay, that shows up once it's been initialized properly. This is my custom API call. I've essentially created my own custom action for the workflows. Okay, we'll be taking a look through all of these steps in just a moment here, right? So similarly, for my next call, the email status, this is going to be used as a data source. Okay, now this is a lot simpler in its setup. It's really just asking for information rather than sending out information. So once I initialize this here, then I can see all of the info about that particular email. This is all information coming back from Postmark. And what I'm paying attention to for my sample application right now is this value right here. Under message events, the type of event, the label for that. Right now we can see that this one was delivered. So if the email bounced or was undeliverable for some reason or is still processing, right, we would see different type values. And that's something I want to display to my users so that they're always aware, maybe they need to resend the email, they know whether their contact got it or not. All right, so now back into the design here for this status, here's how we're actually going to leverage that data source. And I'm going to build this from scratch again right below here. So what I'm doing is I'm inserting dynamic data, and I'm going to get data from an external API. The API provider is my custom provider here, Postmark email status. That's the name of the call. And you can see there's the custom message ID. And so I'm going to insert the rows email message. It's referencing my database record, Postmark ID. We'll see in a moment in workflows, we're actually going to save the ID as soon as it's sent so that I can then reference that ID in order to receive the status again. So from the status, I'm going to go over to message events, right? These are all the details from Postmark. I did not set these up. These are not in my database. Message events, I'm going to go to the most recent. So I'm going to select last item, and then I'm going to insert the type, right? So it might say delivered, or it might say processing, something like that. Right, and that's how I am in real time, right? As soon as you load the page, that API call will happen automatically for you for all of the emails that we see here in this table. Be very mindful of, pagination for your tables for things like this. The last thing you want to do is have the table produce 1,000 rows immediately, and then you're subsequently, running 1,000 API calls. So you want to add pagination so that maybe you're looking at 10 at a time, right? One page of 10, second page of 10, things like that to keep things under control. Now we're going to look at the workflows. The workflows are what connect your backend data structure to the front end designs so that you can actually trigger functions all without code. Let's take a look. Let's start with the workflows in our header. Each of these buttons are going to trigger a navigation action to move the user between pages. So when the contacts button is clicked, for example, we're going to run a go to page action to go over to our contacts page. Very easy. So you can find this under navigation, go to page, and then you'll choose your destination. Okay, we have the same thing for email, going to the email page, as well as pipeline to the pipeline page. We do have a logout button that's also hidden on the screen right now. It is going to be visible as long as the user is logged in. So when they click on that, it will run a log out function and then just navigate them automatically back to our login page. So really, really simple, straightforward workflows for this. Let's go over to our contacts page here. So jumping into the workflow section, we do have a number of different triggers here for managing the contact. Let's start with the create new contact button here. Let me turn off this condition preview, right? So this is our default state for this button. Okay, so when I go to edit this workflow, you can actually see that this button has two separate workflows coming off of it. Again, it's for that dual purpose design that I intentionally went for here. So we have conditions so that only one of these will ever run at a time. If the button is clicked and our edit contact group is visible, that means that we're making a change to the contact, right? That edit form has all of those inputs that the user can modify for the element, for the contact, sorry. And then if the button is clicked and the edit contact is not visible, it is assumed then that they are seeing the table of all of the contacts. And in that case, all we want to do is create a new record. Okay, this is creating a new contact. We don't have any other information for them yet. It's really just a blank record. And because this will meet the search constraints of our table, right? This is searching for any contact in the system. That new contact will automatically display down below. I'll actually show you here. When we click on the button, we'll have like an empty line, and that's really representing that empty record in the system. Okay, so new contact, new record was just created. If I delete here, it's going to delete that record. Let's take a quick look at that icon flow there for the delete. Okay, so here this is going to, oh yes, it's going to delete a list of notes first, and then it will delete the contact, right? We do have records that are associated with the contact, and if we delete the contact, not the notes, then that really just means that the notes are orphaned. So we're deleting that list first. We do need to reference the contact in order to get to the notes, so that's why this is happening in this order. Okay, so we're using two separate delete actions here, delete a single thing and delete a list of things. The list being the contact's notes, and then the single thing finally being the contact. And then that will disappear, that row will disappear from the table. Okay, now let's go over to the edit icon here. When this pencil is clicked, we're going to do a few things. We're going to hide the table and show the edit contact group, right? The one with all of the inputs. And we're going to populate the data source of that group. This way we can properly autofill all of those inputs inside of that group. This is basically passing data around, right? When I say I want to edit, row number 2, I need to make sure that this group references that, contact that was in row number 2. So this group here has type of content contact, right? It knows to receive a contact. The data source is empty because we're going to be doing that programmatically. We're doing that through the workflow, right? This data source is being defined with this action. Okay, this is how you can set or change the data source through a workflow. And so the data source is just going to be the row's contact. I click on the pencil icon, whatever contact is being referenced in the row, that's now the data source of our group. And that way from here, everything can reference the parent group's contacts details. Okay, so whenever we're looking at the contact group, we're also going to see this button appear. This button has a condition on it. As soon as the edit contact group is visible, so is this button. And then this is just going to do the reverse for the visibility. It's going to hide that edit group and then show the table. Okay. Here we have a workflow for creating the note. So let's jump over to this button here. Okay, so this is going to create a separate record in the system, a new note record, and we have all these details that we already know about the note. The content, which is going to come from the multi-line input, the contact, which is coming from the edit group's data source, and then the timestamp is just the current date and time. This is a built-in value that Bubble has available for you. Okay, then we're also going to modify the contact record itself. Remember, there's a one-to-one relationship between the note and the contact, but then every contact has a one-to-many relationship with all of the notes created for it. So we have a list field called notes under our contact data type. And so we have list operations here to modify the list. I'm making a change to the contact ultimately, but what I'm changing is the notes field to add one more note to that list every time I create a new one. And the note here is the result of step 1. Right? Bubble's not going to do these auto relationship connections for you. It doesn't know what you're building, and so it is up to you to write all of these instructions. Then we're going to reset the inputs, such as clears out, this input here gives the user visual indicator that the note was created. And we're also going to show a little alert message that we've designed on the page. Let's reveal it here. That just says saved. Okay. We also have a delete in order to delete the individual note. This is going to make a change to the contact to remove the note from the list. You don't technically have to do this because once you delete the note, it's automatically gone from the list, right? Because it no longer exists. But I find that when you're displaying a list of things in a repeating group, it does make the visuals cleaner where everything does disappear immediately. I have found that sometimes when you don't have this action, you often need to refresh the page in order to see that repeating group reflect accurately. So I like to do this two-step process here. Okay, and so those are all of our workflows here for the contacts page. Let's jump over to the pipeline page. So a lot of what we're doing here is related to the drag and drop functionality. Obviously, we have the ability to create new deals. We can also modify existing deals. So let's start with our creation. Okay, so when the new deal button is clicked, we're going to show the pop-up. We're not actually creating the record yet. Okay, the pop-up will essentially reveal a form and say, okay, let's set up your deal, right? Create a new deal. So they'll search for the contacts, they'll enter in their value for the deal, and then they'll select the stage. And here's really where they're committing the creation of the record. Now notice that this is another dual purpose button, right? We have two things coming off of that create deal button because this is the default, but if we're looking at an existing deal, we're using this pop-up as multi-purpose, and in that case, they're gonna be editing the deal. And this will say save changes. So very similar to the contact situation. If the parent group's deal is empty, and we're talking about the pop-up here, ultimately we want to create a new deal record, right? So we're going to map all of the inputs that are in that form to these fields, the selected contact, the status for the stage, from that drop down, and then also the value. Because once they're done creating, we no longer need to see the pop-up, so we're going to hide it. We're going to reset the pop-up so all of the inputs clear out, and we're also going to show an alert message, again, for another visual indicator that it was good to go. If the deal is not empty, so the pop-up is really for editing, right? They're coming from the pipeline, then we're modifying the deal. So still mapping the same values to make any changes. If they change anything, they don't have to necessarily have a change for everything. You may be saving the same value back to itself, but it ensures that nothing is missed. Again, we'll hide, we'll reset, and we'll show that message. So here, if I click on this button, this is going to also open up the pop-up and display data in the pop-up, right? It's setting the data source of the pop-up. Pop-ups are technically containers as well. So very similar to the edit contact situation. This is going to provide it with a data source, and that way we know which flow to go through here when we're ready to create or save. Now, deleting is also found inside of the pop-up. We have this text here that's only going to be visible if we know we're editing something. So this is a very straightforward action to delete the deal, right? We don't need to delete anything else. We don't have other related records here. But visually, we want to hide the pop-up, reset the pop-up, and again, show our alert message. Here, we're customizing the message to say delete, to say deal deleted, rather than saved or something like that. All right. And then finally, we have our drag and drop function. So when you install that plugin, you're going to have a new custom trigger that you have here called a drop area has a group dropped onto it. That's this workflow right here. So as soon as that drop area, right, that we have inside of a repeating group is detected as having of a draggable group being dropped on top of it, then we're going to trigger a change in the status or the stage of the deal. Now note that we do have to define the type of thing here. This is the kind of the workflow content type that we want to be able to reference in our actions. Okay, so in this case, we're working with a deal. So the thing I want to change is the workflows deal. That's going to be the deal associated with the draggable group. And then the status is going to equal this drop area's deal stage. So if you look over here, let's say we want to move city escapes to contract sent. Contract sent is the drop area that has a group dropped onto it, right? City escape is the group, and we're dropping it on top of contract sent, just like that. And so what happens is that we're making a change to the city escapes deal and changing that deal status to this drop area stage. We're changing the status of city escapes to wherever I moved it. That's exactly what's going on there. And because this is a data change, the search of our deals will automatically reflect, right? That deal that was previously in the first stage is no longer going to meet the search constraints of this first column here, but it will meet the search constraints of the other column. So these will automatically update just in real time. I don't need to refresh the page or anything to see those things move. So that's how we get this really interactive board here. All right, so now let's look at the workflows for the email page. This one is very simple. We don't have too many events going on. We do have another dual purpose button here, just like we did on the other two pages. So it's either new email or it's going to say back to email list. Okay, and so if we are looking at the table, right, so if group compose isn't visible, then we're going to show it and hide the table. And then we have the reverse. If group compose is visible, then we'll show the table and hide that group. Send email is really the star of this page right now. Okay, so this is within the compose group that we have here. They'll fill out all of the details and then they'll be ready to send out that message. So this is where we also have our Postmark integration again. Very first thing is I'm going to run that Postmark action to send the email. So I can find that under plugins, Postmark send email, and then all of the dynamic inputs that were defined within the API connector will open up for me and I can populate it with all the values, right? The search box contacts email address, the subject, the actual body. There are some specific values that Postmark wants for identifying, just passing in some metadata. So we're going to send a user unique ID for just internal tracking there. I'm also going to create my own record in my database here to track this message and to be able to display it in the database. In theory, I could also pull in a list of messages directly from Postmark and display it in my table. You know, if you want to get a lot more involved with that, you absolutely can. But I'm going to keep things simple here and just kind of capture only what I need my user to see. This way I don't need to make as many API calls. And I'm just going to save all the details I want here. Now notice the Postmark ID. This is the result of the Postmark actions message ID. Okay, this is information coming from Postmark. This is why I needed to do that action first. And then I have my internal database record getting created second. Then we have just visual reset actions, right? Show my alert message to say it was successful. Reset the group to clear out the inputs. Hide the group, take me back to the table. All right, and that's it. Those are your workflows for all of the features that we have seen within this demo application. All right, I hope this was helpful. And if it was, the content you're about to see on the screen next will help you take things even further.